I'd like to support the amendments that have been moved by my noble friend Lady Meacher, by my noble and learned friend Lady Butler-Sloss, by the noble Lady Baroness Hamwy, and by the noble Lord Doves. I'd like to begin by referring to a meeting which I held with my noble friend Lord Singh, with Dame Rachel de Souza, the Children's Commissioner, quite recently. She'd personally seen children coming off the boats. The Refugee Council found that of the 45,000 people who made the journey in 2022, some 8,700 were children, 1 in 5 of the overall number. And perhaps the Minister, perhaps in response also to the questions put by the noble Baroness Lady Lister, will be able to confirm what the numbers are. Dame Rachel has also visited the accommodation in which many of these children are placed. I'd like the noble Lord the Minister to tell us, I'd like to ask him a number of questions, but particularly when the Children's Commissioner was she consulted about this bill, and how she responded? And how does he respond to her view that the bill, and I quote, drives a coach and horses through the 1989 Children's Act? The position of children should certainly concentrate our minds, and my noble and learned friend perhaps knows better than anybody in this House as a former head of the Family Law Division, how important it is that we have proper cognizance to the effects of law on children. I asked Dame Rachel about the origins and the stories of some of the children that she'd met, and some of which my noble and learned friend had referred to as well. Some had travelled from Sudan, Eritrea, Afghanistan and Iran. Some had taken journeys that lasted a whole year. Some had been left as orphans, some traumatised by war, many telling horrific stories. And she described, for instance, the story of an Iranian boy who watched his parents being killed and who had made the long and arduous journey here to safety. She also referred to a Down syndrome child left on their own. She said that decisions about their treatment and future were being taken by inappropriately low-ranking officials, and I quote, who she said had no understanding of safeguarding, close quotes. Will the noble Lord the Minister urgently look into this question about whether safeguarding criteria is different from the safeguarding used in children's homes? Are the provisions in the bill compliant with the duties contained in the Education Acts? Is it Gillick compliant? And does the Minister recognise the Children's Commissioner's description of the bill as, again I quote, a trafficker's charter? My Lords, no child should be assumed to be an adult, a point I thought made very well a moment ago by the noble Baroness Hamwy. There's no cliff edge. It seems to be an assumption woven into the web and weave of this bill that somehow there is a magic moment when you cease to be a child and become an adult. The position of children should certainly be put into the impact assessment that we will all wait to see with great anticipation. But it's not simply an impact assessment that's been missing from the legislative scrutiny that I referred to earlier on. There's only been one select committee which has had the chance to scrutinise this bill, the Joint Committee on Human Rights, on which I am a member. And it's had to do so at a crazy pace, with many of our meetings clashing with this bill's proceedings, all being, well, it will reach its final iteration tomorrow, not, I'm glad to say, in due course. This is simply no way to make legislation. When we legislate in haste, we end up repenting at leisure. At second reading, I referred to my misgivings about a number of aspects of the bill, and amongst these was the treatment of children, the subject of these amendments. They are affected by every aspect of the bill, and which clearly infringe the rights of children set out in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, referred to by my noble friend Lord Haney. The Home Office gives as their justification for doing this that they are protecting the best interests of children by seeking to deter them and the adults accompanying them from embarking on these journeys in the first place. But, my Lords, this is a straw man argument. It relies on the assumption that the child or adult knew in advance how dangerous the journey would be, and assumes that in any event the journey would be less dangerous than, say, staying in Sudan, where millions are now displaced, or Iran, think of the plight of women there, or Nigeria, think of those who are facing execution because of their beliefs or their orientation, or facing genocidal attacks from Boko Haram. My Lords, the Convention on the Rights of a Child does not revolve around such calculations. The desire for deterrence cannot negate or supplant the duty of the UK and this government to protect all children, every child, whatever their origins, and who are within its jurisdiction. How a country treats its children is a mark of whether that country deserves to describe itself as being civilised. How do convention duties square with indefinite detention in whatever place the Secretary of State and her officials deem to be appropriate, and for however long as she decides is reasonably necessary before maybe she decides that they should be cast out? How can our convention rights be squared with dispatching children to far-flung places without any true idea of what circumstances will await them there? Who will verify that appropriateness? What will be the criteria? How will such assessments be undertaken? Too many of the bill's provisions relating to children are vague and insufficiently rigorous. The bill puts onto a statutory footing the provision of accommodation for unaccompanied children, but then fails to define what form such accommodation must consist of. It's as if we've learnt nothing from the endless ordeals of children in institutional care. My Lords, I repeat, why isn't Home Office accommodation being made subject to the duties set out in the Children's Act of 1989? Why aren't standards of requirements set out in the bill itself? I ask this against the backdrop since 2021 of the Home Office accommodating unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in hostels. Can the Minister remind us how many of those children have gone missing? How many remain missing? And how can the Minister justify the provisions to take a child from local authority accommodation, which is subject to the 1989 Act, and put them into Home Office accommodation, which is not? My Lords, there are also convention implications from age assessment, not least invasive body searches of children who may have undergone trauma or have been subjected to abuse. My Lords, is that Gillett compliant? Be clear that these and other provisions mean that the bill is likely to fall short of compliance with the UN Convention and the rights of the child, but also, my Lords, under Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, and potentially Article 3, which deals with prohibition of torture, inhumane and degrading treatment. Has the Minister also considered Article 22 of the Convention and any use of powers to remove a child without first considering their asylum claim? My Lord, these are crucial questions which, if they can't be resolved here in committee, will certainly have to be resolved when we reach report. But I hope the Noble Lord will be able to give the committee the courtesy of reply to some of these questions today.